that booming.
There. Welcome to our behind-the-scenes version of our podcast. We're glad you're watching. If you want the full, edited, and shorter audio version, visit www.carnivoretheology.com. Welcome to Carnivore Theology, a podcast that answers questions about the Christian faith to help you grow from milk to meat into wise, skilled, world-changing followers of Jesus Christ. With theologian and pastor Chad Graham, author and pastor Al Desno, and me, your host, Steve Bastian. Today we talk politics with pastor and former member of Parliament, Reed Elley. And they purposely try to mess me up whenever I do that. So they're not just making faces. Well, they generally
That's
do.
my face. I'm not making faces. That's my face.
You got to live with that one, eh?
I do.
Okay. So, hey, Al, this place is beautiful. Where are we? I don't even know how to say the name.
Okay, this is the Byward Market. I mean, we came down here because we were talking about political stuff. So I brought us down to the most wonderful place outside of the Parliament Hill, and that is the Byward Market. So we're standing here next to the beaver tail shop. We're going to have the most delicious pastry you've ever had in your life. We're standing in line, but unfortunately the line is all the way around the corner and down the street because this is officially the most popular place in Ottawa. And so we're going to hang out and we're going to chat a little bit, but this is the Byward Market. It's all the glory thereof. It's amazing to hang out with. It's like a farmer's market meets a mall. During the day, it's a great place to bring your kids and family. Don't come here at night. You might get murdered. But just when the lights are on, everything's great.
With the size of this lineup, I might need a coffee break. Al, is there some place we can grab a bean around here?
Well, I'll tell you what, man, there are a ton of Tims. I mean, this is, being the fact that this is downtown Ottawa, you are always within spitting distance of a Tim Hortons. I'm pretty sure they are a, what do they call those? A pundit? No, what do they call those? They're a lobby group. Pretty sure that Tim Hortons is a lobby group on the Hill.
Yeah. Hey, we ran into somebody here as we were walking around, and I'm lucky enough to know this guy, and we want to talk a little bit with him. Reed Elley's here with us.
Reed, hey, man, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm all right. Did you get your beaver tail yet, or are you waiting?
Well, I'm anticipating it.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Yeah. So let me tell you a little bit about Reed. I've known Reed for several years, both in my care group in my church and as the elder, one of the elders of the church. We swap fishing stories, but we haven't managed to time a fishing trip together yet.
I know.
We've tried a few times, but and Reed really does have a unique set of skills that kind of makes him an expert in politics and church. He started off as a pastor with his NDiv in 3 different provinces. So he started, 1968 and to 76 in Ontario, and then he moved to Calgary. Chad, that's where you're from.
No, actually to Victoria.
To Victoria, okay.
Oh well.
And then
Perfect.
Then Calgary.
And then Calgary. And you're there from the mid-'80s to 93?
Yep.
And then you moved to Nanaimo and pastored a church there from 94 to 97.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've done
Big
some
fan
more.
Big fan of your bars there in Nanaimo.
Oh, thank you.
Not the taverns, the actual little yellow squares. Those delicious yellow squares.
Just to clarify that point, Al.
Yeah. You've been helping out
Trying to
churches.
find the bars wherever you go, right? Is that what you're saying?
I do. I've tried Calgary bars, I've tried Edmonton bars, and the best ones are the Nanaimo bars.
They are.
Yeah. And Reed's been helping out churches on the island with internships and stuff, helping them with transitions and things like that. But one of the things that makes him unique about being here in Ottawa is he served as a member of Parliament for the Nanaimo Cowichan from 97 to 2004. Started off with the Reform Party, which I was once a card-carrying member of the Reform Party, and then the Canadian Alliance Party, and then he finished his career in politics with the New Conservative Party under Stephen Harper.
Wow.
Reed now lives on Vancouver Island. He's active with the local Conservative Party here, and is heavily involved with his church, being an elder and all, and caring for the people in and around his community and church. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, I respect Reed a lot, and it's really I'm really glad that he's willing to talk with us, not too scared off by these long lineups and beaver tails and
I'd be more concerned to be scared off by Al.
We bring about ourselves. So.
Oh yeah,
Hey.
my mother always told me never trust a guy that's got a beard. Now look where I am.
Hey, I got a question for you, Reed.
What do you guys do?
I don't know much about politics, but one of the things that I remember that was probably my favorite thing that I ever saw in the Edmonton Sun was when the Canadian Alliance Party and the Reform Party got together and they came up with that acronym, the Canadian Reform Alliance Party. Were you there during those times when it came out on the cover and said, "It's crap"?
I remember it distinctly. I remember the assembly where we were adopting this name. And Jay Hill, who is was the member from up north in BC, got up and said, "Folks, we cannot have this. Do you really see what this is going to say if people shorten it?" So we very quickly changed our name. I don't know why somebody didn't pick that one up.
It got out there. It made the news.
Look, we're the government of Canada now. I mean, it can't be all bad.
Yeah.
I love that you thought of that first, Al. I was actually thinking of that myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chad and Al, why is it important that we talk to politics and church and how they mesh together? Why is that an important topic? You can just.
Well, I think government is very important because government is God's idea. And one of the things that we recognize is in the Bible, there's a description that God has created two realms, the heavenly realm and the earthly realm, the visible and the invisible. And we learn that before the earth was ever founded in God's invisible realm, he lived with a heavenly government. Psalm 82 says, God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. And we learn in Job about the sons of God on a typical day coming and visiting in heaven. God doesn't need a government to rule heaven. That seems silly. And yet that's what he chooses to do. And when God created us in the garden, he created Adam and Eve, the first people. He gave them a commission to have dominion over the world to represent him as his image bearer. It was a government role. God didn't need government on earth, but that's how he chose to create us. So at the very heart of who we are is government. Now through sin, we've corrupted everything in the world, including government. And so today we have representative groups of local governments that help to monitor what's going on in the world, but God commissions them. Romans 13 says it's God's idea and he appoints them. Genesis chapter 9 says that God has a very specific role intended for government in order to protect the lives and value of his image bearers. So government's important because it's God's idea.
Al, do you have anything to add to that, or?
Well, yeah, I freely admit that I'm a political novice. I don't really understand what's going on at any given moment. Actually, that's true about a lot of things in my life. But that's why I'm kind of glad that Reed's here. I will say this, though. I was sitting with a group of older pastors and asked them the question, you guys have been through a lot more elections than me. Does this one feel different to you? Because I feel this one has more weight, more potential for something bad to happen if Canada doesn't get it right, whatever that means. And they looked at me and they said that they agree with that. They said, you know what, this one does feel different. One guy even likened it all the way back to John A. Macdonald, who was trying to form Canada. Like, it was that significant in his eyes. And so that's the thing. I don't even know what I'm talking about when it comes to politics, and I would like to learn more. So that's why I'm glad we're here talking about this. I know Christians that are wild about their politics, even more than they are about their Bibles. And I know Christians who have basically written off politicians as either useless or evil. In fact, and they lump all government into it. For them, anything organized religion or organized politics, just bundle it up and throw it out. It's all corrupt. And I don't know many that are in between.
You've been hanging out with your Freeman on the land friends there, Al?
Not as often as I should. So I'm really looking forward to talking with Reed to find out how I, as a Christian or I, as a Christian leader, should be thinking about this stuff. Why is it important? What am I supposed to do when the political sphere happens all the time and all that drama? How should I think about it?
Yeah. Well, Al, it sounds like you got a couple of big questions lined up. Do you want to go first?
I would love to. Okay, Reed, you ready? You got your hat on?
Yep.
You know, I've been wearing hats this time around. You know, so I've worn a few different kind of hats. Today I don't know what my hat's made of because, quite frankly, I don't know what to put on there. So hopefully you're wearing your thinking cap. You ready? Okay. My first question is this: has Canada's government usurped the church's responsibility to care for the needy? After all, it was the Christian church that was the driving force behind educational institutes, hospitals, community development, taking care of the poor. Now there's a lot of churches that are stuck trying to find their identity because so much of the stuff the Bible tells us to do is being done by the government. So has the government usurped what the church is supposed to be doing?
Well, you know, that's a great question. I think there's a huge tension in our society between government and the church or charitable organizations. On the one hand, the government seems to want to sort of put tighter parameters around churches and charitable organizations. Revenue Canada, you know, does a lot of investigations of charities, and some charities have been shut down because they say they're too political, like Campaign Life, for instance. They no longer can issue charitable tax receipts and that sort of thing. So there is a tension there. Yeah, I think in some ways, in the history of the Christian church here in Canada, there was a period where churches allowed the government to take over the good works that they were doing. You know, and as you rightly say, you know, the huge charitable organizations of this country were started by Christians. You know, you start back when the French Catholics were here, and they started all these hospitals. And there's still lots of Catholic hospitals around the country. You take the organizations like the Elizabeth Fry and the John Howard. They were started by Christians, you know. Children's aid societies in Ontario, where I was born, were started by Christians. You know, first it was the orphanages, and then it became greater. The university that I graduated from, McMaster in Hamilton, it was started by Baptist Christians, you know, who had a vision for higher education. But along the way, the financial burden for a lot of these organizations became too great, and the government says, well, we'll take it over, you know, we'll tax people and we'll help you run these things. But when government takes it over, they take it over, you know. And so for a long stretch of time, we've allowed the government to do that. But I think in the last 20 years, in my view, we have seen churches start to reevaluate that, you know. They've taken a hard look at what's going on, and they've said, hey, we better get back into this. And so the food banks that are across the country, many of them are started by Christians, you know. It's a huge need that is there, and Christians are providing some of the help and answers to it. So,
well, that's some of our question. Even in our church, we're looking around and we're going, you know what? We'd love to serve our community, but good gracious, it's all done between the organizations of the homeowners that get together, or the home builders that get together, and they have their own little network. They're basically doing, you know, community church organizations, and all the concerts that are out there. Well, they're doing all the fun music stuff, and all the government programs that are taking care of the needy and taking care of the poor, and the addictions counseling and the hospitals. And like we sit there in a meeting and we think, well, what's left for us to do now?
Well, yeah, I agree with you. We do struggle with that. I know we struggle with that in our own church, and we've got far more community outreach going on now in the last 5 years than we've had for a long time. That has a lot to do with the new pastor that came to our church and the kind of mix of people that are there now. But you know, we live in a small town back on Vancouver Island of about 4,000 people, and we are becoming a church that is well known in the community because of the good works and love that we shower upon people. And so I think the church has to get back into that at a low cost. You know, I mean, we haven't got all the money in the world, so we've got to find other ways to do this. And the thing is, if the government continues to constrict churches with regulations and laws, and the churches have to stop doing what they're doing, all of a sudden the government is going to be faced with a huge vacuum of service if the churches pull out of doing what they're doing, and government couldn't take over. You know,
I think that is encouraging. What you just said is encouraging. That there would be, if the churches quit today, Canada would feel it. To me, I take that as an encouraging thing to say.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask another question, just kind of reverse the direction from looking at the church's perspective on interacting with government to the Christian's perspective of interacting in government.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks to your kind of unique experience that way, I started off by talking a little bit about the idea that the Bible talks about government being God's idea. There's a fair amount about the nature of government in Scripture, but obviously there's also a lot left to our wisdom and in practice. And so I kind of wonder, in our society today, with multiculturalism and everything going on, in what kind of ways do you think having a Christian or biblical worldview, personally has shaped your view of work in politics, but in general, how can we as Christians engage in today's political climate as Christians? What biblical Christian worldview things should we be bringing forward?
Yeah, another good question. All of our lives are a progression. We started someplace. We were shaped and formed by the environment in which we were brought up. I happened to be brought up in a very religious home that was also very political. My father was a conservative, my mother was a liberal, and for years they went out and canceled each other's vote. And then John Diefenbaker came along, and he was a Baptist Christian, and my mother loved John Diefenbaker, so she became a conservative. And around election time, things got very quiet. There wasn't anything to squabble about anymore. But anyways, so our lives are progression. So I came out of that with a biblical worldview of being involved in the world around you and making a difference, taking seriously Jesus' teaching about being salt and light in society, to be the beacon on the top of the hill when the valley is dark, all of these things. And so when I went into ministry, I wasn't afraid, and this was in the 70s, I wasn't afraid to say to my congregations, look, you have an obligation as a Christian in this society to speak up. Whether that's writing a letter to the editor, whether that's attending a council meeting, whether that's getting involved in an election and supporting the person that you think could best represent you, you need to do that. So I went even further. I started to openly support one political party. In those days, it was the Progressive Conservative Party. And so I can remember living in Victoria in the 1980s and taking my kids with me, and we were going door to door distributing literature for the Conservative candidate, And it's interesting that in all the churches I was in, where they knew that I was political, and I never had any direct static or criticism from anybody in the church. Now, maybe they talked behind my back, I don't know. But, they never kicked me out. They never asked me to leave. I think they respected what I was doing. And I hope that I was some kind of example to them of what they should be. You see, when we started to see the churches lose their place in society in terms of doing good, we also had an accompanying theological movement that says, look, don't worry about this, the Lord's coming back. Remember Hal Lindsey and all that? Yep. And that was going on in the 70s too. And a lot of evangelicals, they bought into the Jesus is coming back tomorrow sort of thing. And so they just threw up their hands and said, well, we don't have to be involved in politics anymore, or we shouldn't be, because Jesus is coming. And, by default, we evangelical Christians allowed this country to get into the situation it's in today, and that's really sad. Now, I don't know if that answers your question, but probably not. But you need to know where I'm coming from in this, So
that's exactly what I was looking for.
Natural evolution for me to finally, take a stand and say, yeah, I'm going to run for Parliament. As a Christian, I'm going to get really involved here.
Yeah, that's fascinating as you think, too, about coming out from that pastoral setting directly into the political world. If I just ask a very short follow-up, would just be, when you made that transition at the time that you did, was there any grief within your political party about carrying your Christian values in?
Well, no, because one of the reasons I got really active in politics was because of Preston Manning. When Preston was the leader of the Reform Party, I ran into him in Calgary in 1988, and they were doing seminars on what was it called? The Christian in the World. I think it was sponsored by Regent College.
Sure.
And we were at Mount Royal College for this thing. Deb Gray was there. She'd just been elected to Parliament. Preston was there. And they talked about how a Christian should integrate their faith into the political system. And I thought that was fascinating. You know, I just had so much admiration for those two people who were both committed Christians, you know. And so I thought, yeah, if they can do it, I can do it. Now, I didn't going back into my church and suddenly start preaching, you know, political stuff from the pulpit. I never did that.
Right.
But I started to get more active, and so in 1997, when the sitting member of Parliament in Nanaimo, Cowichan, Bob Ringma, announced that he was retiring, and we knew we were coming up to an election pretty quickly. You can always tell when there's an election coming in Ottawa. Things start to happen, and he resigned, and very quickly we had to find a candidate to take his place, you know, and there were 5 good guys that came forward. I dragged my feet for a couple of weeks as I prayed about it, as I said, oh, no, I'm not going to do this, and then my wife says, you should do this. If you don't, you'll regret it, you know.
Decision made.
Yeah. So finally I put my hat into the ring. We only had 3 weeks left in the nomination campaign. I'd lost 2 weeks dilly-dallying around and praying. That's not, I don't mean that. You heard it here first. I just was unsure of things, you know. And so finally I got into the race because some people in the party came to me and said, you're the kind of person we'd like to have represent us. It's interesting, these people were not committed Christians. It wasn't the committed Christians that came first and asked me. But when I decided to do it, my church fully backed me up. My elders board said, yeah, go for it. We'll give you a leave of absence, and you know, if you don't make it, you can come back. You can still be our pastor. So it was great.
That's good.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, when you're in '97, when you decided to be the run for the nominants of the Conservative Party, and how did you find balancing that with, you know, so much in the Bible and a Christian walk to be humble and you know, and how did you find promoting yourself and promoting your party and the humility that the Christian walk, you know, is so heavily connected with?
Yeah. Well, of course, that's a huge thing. You know, I think for anybody, whether they're a Christian or not, you know, I had fairly large churches in my pastoral days. You know, my last church had 700 people in it, and you know, it was in a sense, it was a big thing to be the pastor of this church, the senior pastor of this church. You know, you had a lot of responsibility. We had 5 on staff, and you know, it was the largest evangelical church in Nanaimo. So I had to watch that even in the church, that, you know, I didn't let my ego, you know, take me the wrong way. And my wife always kept me humble too. You know, she still does. You know?
I can attest to that. I see her every once in a while. I'll give you the little kick in the
I know. Yeah.
She's awesome.
You know, So be careful there. And so anyway, when I became a member of Parliament, you know, I was really in the limelight. Goodness, you know, I was in the limelight as the senior pastor, but now I'm in the limelight as the member of Parliament. And everywhere I go in that riding, you know, there are people who know me. Now, that's still the case today. You know, I haven't been the member of Parliament here for 11 years, and I go into Superstore and somebody says, "Oh, hi, Mr. Elley. How are you doing? How's the political climate?" There are people who still think I'm the MP. Goodness sakes, TELUS hasn't taken my name out of their phone book in the Duncan directory, which says Reed Elley MP and my old number. And I phoned them 4 times. I said, I'm no longer the MP. Oh, that's all right. So they never take it out. So, you know, it's disconnected, so I never get calls. But you know, there is that that spotlight thing that's on you, and I think the thing that helped me most was that just by nature, I'm a people person, and because of my belief system, I was very much known as a compassionate person who reached out to people. In my pastoral ministry, I was the guy that made sure that he visited every family in the church. You know, he got into their homes and started to get to know them face to face. So when crisis came along, it wasn't a strange thing to have the pastor there, you know. So that carried on through into what I then decided was another form of ministry as a member of Parliament. And one of the major responsibilities of a member of Parliament is to make sure that he's available to his constituents at least part of the time. You know, you can't be when you're in Ottawa. But I used to fly back and forth from Vancouver Island to Ottawa every week. Now that eventually told on my health.
Yeah.
But I felt I owed it to my constituents to be in my office for half the day or a day when I got home so I could hear their concerns and get myself and my staff to act on it. So hearing those stories from people helped me to keep on track and I guess to be somewhat humble in the situation because I was here representing them and I was here to help them.
Can I ask you a question about people? I really appreciate what you just said about the importance of relationships. And I have friends, and they are liberal. I have friends that are NDP. I have friends that are conservative. I don't have any Green Party friends at all, but I don't know what that means. Each of these parties is so radically different, and from my perspective, sometimes even anti-Christian. And I'm wondering, can you take a minute to answer this question? I know you're part of the Reformed and the Canadian Alliance Party, so you're on the right. But can a right-thinking, as in properly thinking, biblically minded Christian vote for any of the Canadian parties with a good conscience? Can a good Christian be NDP? Can a good Christian be liberal, like wholeheartedly liberal, card-carrying, as Steve said, and still be right-thinking and biblically minded?
Boy, that's a hard one because it brings an element of judgment into the situation, and that I'm somewhat uncomfortable about that. However, in my experience of being a Christian in politics, I did bring a certain amount of judgment to bear upon the things I was hearing and seeing from the other parties. Mm-hmm. And it always centered around moral issues for me, you know. Same-sex marriage, abortion, euthanasia, sort of the red light issues that probably make you take a stand whether you want to or not, you know.
Right.
And so, boy, this is hard for me to say, but I remember there was an NDP member from Thompson, Manitoba, a very fine Christian lady who during the same-sex marriage debates went against her own party's wishes on it. And she was turfed, you know. She didn't get the nomination in the next election. Now, to me, that's wrong. You know, if God has set up this government on this earth, then somehow, because He's given us the moral authority and free choice to decide what we believe, political parties should respect that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the NDP and the Liberals do not do that. You know that both those parties will not allow any pro-life people to be running for their parties. To me, that's a violation of conscience. Mm-hmm. It's a violation of free speech, you know. And so I, as a Christian, would find it very, very difficult to be in those parties. I don't think I'd last very long, quite honestly. You know. So now, coming to the Conservative Party, is it any better? My experience is, yes, it is. Even though Stephen Harper has chosen not to raise the abortion issue in terms of legislation, he does give all of his caucus members the opportunity to exercise their right to speak about things that are right to life and to even introduce motions into the House. You'd not find that in the other parties, you know.
Oh, so, certainly not. Not from what I understand.
No. Yeah. So from that point of view, is the Conservative Party better for a Christian than the others? I say yes, it is. Now, I don't know. You know, here's a for instance, and a lot of people think Stephen Harper's a huge tyrant, that he's just got his his hand heavily upon the caucus, and everybody kowtows to him. Well, I'll tell you, when I was a member of Parliament in the year 2003, I think it was, the Liberal government took a stand not to send our troops into Iraq with the coalition. Now, the Conservative Party, under Stephen Harper at the time, felt otherwise. They felt we should be doing our part as members of NATO and so on to go into Iraq. Now, I come from somewhat of a pacifist background. I don't think that everything should be settled by the sword. Sometimes it has to be, but I'm more of a pacifist than not. And so I argued in caucus against us putting forward a motion that says we should send our troops to Iraq. One of our other members of Parliament within the caucus also argued that. I remember sitting down in Stephen's office, talking to him about this from my Christian perspective, and he knew where I was coming from. I argued about it in caucus too. Now, I didn't win the day in caucus because we're going to bring the motion to the House. And 2 days before the motion was to come before the House, Stephen came to me in the opposition lobby, and he said, Reed, he said, I respect where you're coming from in terms of your Christian convictions about this motion. And he said, if you don't want to vote for it, I'm not going to stand in your way. What he was saying is that I could vote against my own party, And he also gave the other member the same right. And he said, not only am I going to allow you this freedom because of where you stand on this issue, but I want you to take one of the member statement slots that always occurred before the question period. And he said, you state your feelings and how you're going to vote on this. And I thought, wow, this is democracy.
That's not exactly the persona you see on the CBC.
I know.
So you're trying to tell us that the media narrative isn't always reflective of reality?
It's almost as though it's simplified for the viewer.
Yeah. So, I mean, no one would know that story. I never made it public, particularly at that time. I did let people know who were criticizing Harper as a tyrant. He listens to caucus. I know he has changed his mind about an issue because of what caucus has said, Now
contrast that with, say, Trudeau, good old JT, who says, I will not allow anybody in my party to not be pro-abortion. You're not even allowed to be here if you think that way.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. It's a pretty strong contrast, I think. And I mean, a Christian has to really vote intelligently. They have to get to know what these parties stand for. And I'm not saying everything in the Conservative Party I agree with. I don't. But I agree more with them than I do with any other party.
That seems to be where it comes down to. Is I talk to these guys they almost say the lesser of the three evils seems to be a phrase that I hear a lot. The lesser of the three evils. Yeah. And it's not a matter of I'm totally sold out to this party or that party. It's when I look at the fallenness of man and the fallenness of the political system, when I try to decide where I'm going to cast my vote, how I'm going to engage in the democratic process, that's the one that I think will do the least amount of damage, or that's the one that I distrust the least. Is there okay? Let me ask a follow-up question. There is a political cynicism out there, especially among a lot of people. So, how do you battle that political cynicism, where they just want to wash their hands and walk away, or they just see everything as evil?
Well, I mean, politics is no different than any of the other aspects of our lives. If we're walking the talk, people are going to see that eventually. When I got first elected, I won this seat by about 9,000 votes. Mm-hmm. In 2000, when I ran again, I won by 12,000 votes. I only lost 9 polls in the whole riding. They called it a landslide. Now, I can only suspect that people decided that I was somebody that they really wanted to have as their member of parliament for whatever reasons, whatever my characteristics were. You know, if you walk the talk, people respond to it. Now, not everybody's going to ever agree with you, and there were issues that I took a stand on that I got huge public flack for right across the nation, especially on gay marriage, you know. And it hurt deeply to have people talk about me the way they did, because they didn't really know me, you know. That's what the media does. The media makes all kinds of statements about people, and they really don't know them, you know. And the media can be a very, very hurtful thing. And it's why members of Parliament are taught in their early days how to handle the media, you know. You don't have to answer every question.
Yeah. That's a tough, it makes me think as you go through some of these different questions, you know, discussing holding to your principles in maybe dissent from the government, or one of the historical debates within Christian thinking about government is what our perception should be towards some of these different viewpoints. And so today we often hear about tolerance, and that usually means doing whatever the liberal media perspective is, and anything else is intolerant. But the historic view of tolerance in the bigger picture is often discussed today under the term principled pluralism. And that's the idea for our listeners, that there are different people within our society who have very strong principles. There are conservative Christians, there are traditional liberals, there are libertarians, there are Muslims, there are Hindus, and they are all valued parts of our society from different perspectives. And so when you come together, you allow each of them essentially to stand up for their principles. And this is generally called principled pluralism. But historically, Christians have sort of advocated for Christian ethics, Christian values, a sort of Christian state, as it were. And we saw that in the Puritan New England. We've seen that in Great Britain. We've seen that in some of the early years in Canada. And then as that has morphed and changed, really, we still basically have a bunch of Christian people in Canada discussing Christian traditions. Today's different. Now we're finally different. We truly have these significantly different voices. In your opinion and from your experience, is that something that Christians should champion, this idea of principled pluralism, or should we simply just champion Christian values and not worry about this broader philosophical principle?
Well, I think you've got a couple of things going in that question. You know, the first thing is, yes, we're in an age where the word tolerance has lost its meaning, and because of the huge influence of media, and how that particular viewpoint has say, infiltrated universities, institutes of higher learning. Tolerance means tolerant of my view. You know, you have to accept my view, but if you've got a different view, forget it. You know, and we've seen this with the pro-life groups on university campuses, where, you know, they have the right to have their point of view just like everybody else does, but it's just incredible how a so-called liberal higher education institution will shut down free speech. You know,
yeah.
I mean, this never happened when I was going to university in the '60s. You know, it was still a liberal education in the fact that all viewpoints were welcomed, and not just tolerated, but talked about intelligently.
That's the classical liberalism you're talking about.
Yeah, classic liberalism. But today, if you want to hold a meeting on pro-life issues in a university, you're going to have to you'll have to expect that there'll be people coming to that meeting to try to shut you down. You know.
Well, actually, I've listened to that online, and they were talking about how, or this is through different people that I listen to, and what they say is that if you are a liberal and you want to espouse liberal things, there will be no conservatives standing up, yelling and screaming at you and then running past you with their shirt off. Yeah. Whereas if you are a conservative and you want to express your feelings or express your opinions, you will have a liberal standing there shouting you down. Because our conservative mindset is not to yell our opinion. It's not the way we're built. Yeah. And so it's sort of swayed towards the liberals because the conservatives got afraid. Then the liberals are the ones who have the loudest shout.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and I think it's because you know, the moral worldview of conservative Christians is far different than left-wing liberals, you know, and they don't care about decency and tolerance and allowing other people to share their views and live their lives the way they want. And it's, you know, what they started out being accusing conservatives of doing, they are now doing, you know, in extreme. And so, yeah, it's a big battle out there. Now, there was a second part of your question, and I can't remember what it was now.
Yeah, just looking at that reality, the philosophical umbrella being discussed today in Christian circles anyway, and others, is that we ought to support the idea of principled pluralism, that we should be champions of each person, each group being able to stand up for their principles, and as we have opportunities, should we be championing that in Canadian society, or should we just simply champion Christian values and not worry about the others so much?
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, I agree, and you know, as sort of a bedrock principle, I think that Christians should follow is that we should champion free speech. You know, if we don't champion it, then we're going to totally lose it, you know, and that means free speech for the Muslim, for the Hindu, for the Sikh, for the atheist, you know. Now, I think we're starting to grab a hold of that, and it's interesting that people like Ezra Levant are championing this from his Jewish perspective and standing up for Christians, you know. Now, I've known Ezra since 1992 when we had the referendum in Calgary, and I was in charge of the referendum in Calgary Centre. And one day, you know, this young guy walks into my office and says, "My name's Ezra Levant, and I want to help out with the referendum." Of course, the Reform Party was leading the charge against the Charlottetown Accord, and you know, and I knew right away that this guy is gonna, you know, he's gonna let his voice be known in our society. So here we got Ezra championing this pluralism, you know, by saying everybody ought to have the right to share their opinion. There are some opinions that, you know, we don't agree with, but at the same time, those opinions should be allowed to be shared. So
can I push back on that, Reed?
Pardon me?
Can I push you back on that a little bit?
Yeah.
Some people are dumb and other people are evil.
Okay.
And so, like, I get this whole idea that you say, oh, it's nice to have tolerance and it's nice to listen to people's opinion, but at the same time, aren't there some people out there that really don't get an opinion? Let me throw out, you know, murderers or pornographers, you know, people that are legit evil, or for that matter, people that just stand up and just espouse hatred for religion, hatred for, you know, atheists, hatred against another group, like ISIS standing up and saying, "I will just plain old kill you." Like, do they get a voice, or is that just something you have to take because that's the society we want to live in?
Well, I think those people that you've mentioned do get a voice, and they do it by their actions, you know, I mean, that are very public. I mean, the guy who's murdering somebody, it soon becomes well known, you know. What ISIS does around the world is well known. And so, yeah, they get their opportunity to press their point, you know, and many of them do it in violent and extreme ways. And, you know, from that point of view, when that happens, there has to be a pushback by people who believe differently. Now, how you do the pushback is probably the center of great controversy. You know, I mean, even in this election campaign right now, you know, where the Conservative Party is saying, look, we got to deal with those guys, and so we sent our troops over there to be part of the coalition to deal with it. And the other party say, oh, no, that's not how we deal with it. You know, we need to send overcoats to them when they're, you know, when they're freezing. You know, so yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I do agree that there are people who act badly in our society that have to be shut down just because of the extreme effect it has upon people.
In an open society, though, in my opinion anyway, the marketplace is going to take care of the ideas. And when we have those extremities, we have already in place laws to deal with it. If somebody, we have hate laws, I suppose, if someone's giving true hate. If you have criminal activity, murder, terrorism, they're going to jail. They'll get their day in court where we'll let them speak.
Okay, but listen, they'll come out of jail and they will come out of court, or they will come out and they will say things like, for example, we decide we want to all meet together and we're going to talk about who gets a voice in the room. Someone will stand up and say, you know what we really need in here? We need a militant feminist, and we need somebody from ISIS. And we also, it'd be great if we could have a former crazy person in here, and we need them to be a voice as well, because, you know, they have an opinion. And there will be people out there that say, you know what, you're right, we do need to listen to crazy people. And I just wonder. I apologize if I'm getting off the side, because it just kind of bugs me, the idea that for example, in the church, we don't let everybody have an opinion. We just don't. Not everybody gets to stand behind the pulpit. Not everybody gets to be in the elder team. Not everybody gets to be a deacon. So not everybody gets a voice, because we believe in demonic realm. We believe that Satan tries to use human agents to spread lies and hatred and confusion.
Yeah. No, I understand. You know, the problem, and I also agree, however, that in some ways, you know, the social contract that we have in our society, which says murderers are going to be dealt with by the justice system, you know, it's in effect, and it deals with that person. You know, now, does the social contract that we have with each other deal with everybody? No. You know. In many cases, the social contract has been broken today. It's been fragmented. And so we have all these different voices out there that are clamoring for attention and approval, you know. But somewhere along the line, we have to regroup as a society and say, what do we really believe, you know? And how are we going to, as a society, interact with all of these extreme views that we see out there? I'm hoping that our Christian faith and you know, the worldview we have from Scripture will help us as Christians to be part of putting that social contract back together, some kind of consensus in our society as to how we deal with things.
And we have a political mechanism, Al, for those who, you know, are way out there kind of crazy. We call it the Senate.
That's interesting.
I wish I got that joke. That'd be probably a good joke if I got it.
You start to address this a little bit, what you just said, Reed, about kind of informing people. But more specifically, what advice would you give pastors around informing their flock around politics and government? How would you arm other pastors that you know, around this topic? Because you've lived in their roles and in the politics, and what would you want pastors to know, especially like people like Al, who doesn't know much about politics in general? So
right. Well, you know, I think the pastors have a responsibility to know what's going on in the political realm, probably more than anybody else, because they're a leader. You know, they're a spiritual leader in their area. So they need to do some study. Take a look at what the political parties say. Can you, as a pastor, agree with what this political party is teaching? What it wants to do if it gets into power, you know. Now, do you then stand up in your pulpit and tell people that they need to vote a certain way? No, I don't think that's right, because there are people in our congregations who have very diverse views on politics. You know, I know that there are people in our congregation who happen to support the NDP. I don't agree with them, but I love them anyway. You know. There are people who are classical liberals, have voted liberal all their life. You know, I find it hard to know how people can continue to vote like that if they really know what those parties stand for. But you don't stand up in your pulpit and say, you know, I've studied all the major parties' platform, and so I want to tell you that I agree with this party more than the other. You know, right now our pastor struggles with that, because somebody will get up during the prayer time and want to pray for Stephen Harper. You know, you know, they bring it up within the congregation. And you know, I think he deals with it well. He says, well, you know what, we're going to pray for all the political leaders. You know, And I think that's the way you have to do. Does that stop political conversations going on after the church? Of course not. And I'm as guilty as the next political guy, of engaging people in political conversations after the church service, Those people will come up to me and say, well, how do you think the election's going? Well, that opens up a whole,
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the total disjunction that some people propose today, but of course the church has its priority in the gospel. But yet through history, churches have been leading discussion points of, and I think the difference is that we do have a voice. You talked about earlier being salt and light and so on. We have a voice on the ethics. We have a voice on the values that are being espoused, where we're not necessarily endorsing certain policies per se. We are certainly saying this is a moral evil being proposed that the Bible speaks against, that Christian tradition is against, and that we don't want to support.
And we certainly have a compulsion and a command in Scripture for us to pray for our leaders and our politicians.
Even the ones we disagree with.
Especially the ones we disagree with.
Yeah. The church and Christian people cannot ignore politics. I mean, it's dangerous. It's the same if we ignore other aspects of life and don't speak out on it or have some kind of worldview on it. I mean, the environment. I mean, Christians should have a worldview on the environment that motivates them in terms of their stewardship of the earth. There's all kinds of things. The problem, I think, is that over the years, too, our so-called Christian voice has become very disjointed.
Yeah.
And you have churches who certainly are not conservative churches, who certainly have a worldview that places them squarely within the parameters of a certain political party, And my view of that, however, is that those churches are slowly dying, and I don't know where you go from that. Do you lose a whole bunch of people who could be so-called committed Christians? Who just stop going to church and then don't participate in the political spectrum at all. I think that's part of the problem we have in our society.
Hey, can I close on a question?
Yeah.
Something that I'd like you to answer. I'm couching it because I'm afraid that it's going to be a little silly. Now I have sort of a perspective, and a lot of people have a perspective of politicians. These slick-minded people. You Google image politician, and it doesn't come up with a lot of flattering pictures, if you know what I mean. That you guys are all rich lawyers and economists who are so out of touch with the average Joe you can't possibly consider what reality is like anymore. So can you give me a nice average Joe story, maybe like an embarrassing story or something funny that happened to you as a politician, just to show us that you guys, put your pants on one leg at a time like everyone else?
Oh, wow. That's not one of the prepared questions. Oh, gosh. Oh, yeah.
You didn't meet one goofy character there that clearly didn't know what he was doing. See, I think back to the NDP, because you remember the Orange Crush that came through Quebec, right? Mm-hmm. And I just consider the fact that a lot of these guys who are currently on the Hill now were sitting in their underwear in their basement eating Cheetos, smoking pot, and all of a sudden they realized, boom, they're in politics from now on because the NDP just swept, and these guys were just on a list somewhere. So I'd imagine they have a lot of really good stories about their first days on Parliament Hill and how crazy it was and how different it was. And so I'm just curious if you have any good stories.
Yeah, okay, couple maybe. One had to do with actually not me, but I was party to it. In 1993, when we had the election in that year, the Reform Party candidate in this riding was Bob Ringma. He was a retired Major General of the Army. And so he was on a radio talk show in Nanaimo, and I was part of his campaign team, so I was there listening to him as he spoke in this debate with other candidates. And during one answer to a question, he said, "Well, that's definitely a chink in their armor." Well, immediately the board started to light up with people who were just offended. Little chinks, you know? Well, okay. That was one story I remember.
Man, I can't even put it in the podcast.
I know. and the other one I remember, well, there were others, but one I remember is that when I got to Ottawa in 1997, they had this orientation session for all members of Parliament, and the present Speaker of the House, Gil Parent, gave us a welcome. And the very first thing he said to us, he said, "Well, you've all won the lottery." And I'm thinking, what in the world does he mean, I've won the lottery? Was he talking about all the money we were going to make? Was he talking about that's what elections are, lotteries? You know, you pays your money and takes your choice? That sort of thing, you know? And that sure struck me. And then it was kind of followed up at the Rideau Hall party that the Governor General had for all of the members of Parliament. So you get all dressed up and you go to Rideau Hall and you're welcomed by the Governor General and spouse, and then you go down and you sit at a table with a whole bunch of other people. And I just happened to sit down with a bunch of Reform members. And then we saw the Prime Minister and his wife, John Chrétien and Eileen, making their way through the room, and they're stopping at every table and you know, doing the thing, welcoming us. And so Jean Chrétien gets up to me and he says, "And where are you from?" And I said, "Well, I'm from Nanaimo." "Oh, I know Nanaimo well. I have been to Nanaimo." I thought, well, that's nice. And so his parting remark was, "Well, you just have fun." I'm thinking, the Prime Minister of Canada tells me to have fun with the member of Parliament. The Speaker of the House tells me I've won the lottery. And I'm sitting there wondering, what have I gotten into here? You know? Anyway.
Did you have fun?
Most of the time.
All right, good. See?
Most of the time. And I felt right. That's where God wanted me. For those, you know, those years of my life, 7.5 years, that's where God wanted me. And hopefully I was able to do some kind of good, you know.
That's excellent. That's excellent.
Well, thank you very much for being our guest today. It's really unique for someone to have your perspective, and really helpful, I think, for us and for our regular listeners who are going to be able to take some of this back into their churches and into their Christian walk. And I think that you've helped to encourage all of us to think through these issues a little more. So we appreciate that.
Yes, thank you.
Well, thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Yeah, I always enjoy hearing more stories as well, and you know, you're the second member of Parliament I know by first name, and we've talked about Grant before. I was my doctor as a child went into my childhood doctor became a politician.
Grant Hill.
Yeah, a good person in general as well. So
it was interesting. When I was in the House, we were all assigned to committees, and I was assigned to the Health Committee. I became the deputy health critic, and Grant Hill was, of course, the senior health critic. So we got to know each other quite well.
That's good. That's good. So, hey, thank you again so much, Reed. Hey, Al, quick question. How's your Kickstarter for the Art of the Christian Ninja going?
Oh, it's so good right now. It's actually blowing my mind. The support has been incredible. I've only been doing it for about a week now, and I've gotten over a third of the goal that I want. I've had some amazing people come through and give some really generous gifts, so I really appreciate it. I feel like I'm on the push. Like there's a potential there where it could go either way. So if there's anybody out there that wants to get a copy of the book, or anybody out there that wants to support the printing of this book, it's still ready to go, and it'll continue to be for the next 22 days or so.
And on that topic, it's a great devotional that I can recommend. But if you're thinking about doing the Kickstarter, I just want to tell everyone, don't. You see, when I went on there, it said, if the project goes through, you actually have to pay your pledge. Well, I thought, oh, we'll never get this. I'll throw up a pledge. It looks like it's coming along, so if you finish it, I'm going to have to pay up, and that's the last thing I want to do.
I wondered why it was $666. That was really odd.
No, I've heard about this. Did you send me a thing on it? I can remember on the internet somewhere hearing about this.
Yes.
Maybe something I sent to you in the past, or
I don't know. Yeah, this is not new. I've heard about this.
Yes.
Well, that's excellent.
It's for my book. By all means, spread it around to all of your friends and neighbors. And
Kickstarter is a big mechanism for fundraising for startups, authors, artists.
If you want to raise funds for anything, I subscribe to Kickstarter because I've helped a few people who want to publish their books, and so that's where I heard about it.
Excellent, cool.
Al's got a devotional book, so if you like the Reformed Party of Canada, you should buy Al's book on Kickstarter.
The Reformed Party of Canada is extinct. Does that say anything about his book?
Chad's really bad at helping me. That's what I know. He's really bad at helping me.
NDP leader Tom Milclair endorses Al's book.
Whether he knows it or not, he's on there.
I saw Justin Trudeau climbing up an escalator the other day, saying something about Christian ninjas. I'm pretty sure.
I don't know about that ad. All of a sudden it stops.
Yeah.
It's not going anywhere, and I'm thinking, that's a fairly decent estimation of where he's taking us.
You know what? I don't think he said Christian ninja. I think he said I wish all the Christians would disappear. That's what I think he
probably.
said.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you again, Reed, for your time. And this has been Carnivore Theology with Chad, Al, and Steve. Thank you for listening today as we discuss Christians and politics with Reed Elley. To find out more about Carnivore Theology, or if you have any topics or questions you want us to cover in upcoming episodes, let us know by visiting us on our website, www.carnivoretheology.com, or leaving a message on our SpeakPipe page, speakpipe.com/carnivoretheology. If you like what we're doing, please share with your church and friends, like us on Facebook, rate and subscribe to us on iTunes, or subscribe to our YouTube channel. We encourage you to connect to your local biblical church and keep your eyes on the cross.
All right. Domo arigato.
Aronso.
Bye.